Hello, this is Gregg Braden with the Divine Matrix, bridging time, space, miracles, and belief. Introduction. There's a place where all things begin. It's a place of pure energy that simply is. In this incubator of reality, all things are possible. From our personal success, abundance, and healing, to our failures, our lack, and disease, everything from our greatest fear to our deepest desire begins in this soup of quantum potential. It's through our reality makers of imagination, expectation, judgment, and prayer that we galvanize each possibility into existence. In our beliefs of who we are, what we have and don't have, and what should and shouldn't be, we breathe life into our greatest joys as well as our darkest fears. In 1944, Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, shocked the world by saying that it's precisely in this place, this matrix of energy that underlies our physical world, that everything from the birth of stars to the DNA of life begins. All matter exists by virtue of a force, he said, and we must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is what he called the matrix of all matter. Well, recent discoveries now reveal dramatic evidence that Planck's matrix, the divine matrix, is real. It's this missing link in our understanding that provides the container for the entire universe, the bridge between our imagination and our reality, and the mirror in our world for the things that we create in our beliefs. To unleash the power of this matrix in our lives requires two things. First, we've got to understand what it is and how it works, and secondly, we must communicate with the energy that connects all things in a way that's meaningful. In other words, we've got to speak the language that it recognizes. As a former senior aerospace computer systems designer for more than 20 years, I've searched for the understandings to do just that. From the remote monasteries of Egypt, Peru, and Tibet to the forgotten texts that were edited by the early Christian church. The secret of the divine matrix was left to us. It was coded in the language of our most cherished traditions. And now it's verified in today's science. So when we ask ourselves the question of just what the divine matrix is, the answer itself tells us why it's so important in our lives. The divine matrix is our world. It's also everything in our world. It's us and all that we love, all that we hate, create, and experience. Living in the divine matrix, we're like artists, expressing our innermost passions, our fears, dreams, and desires through the essence of this mysterious quantum canvas. But we are the canvas as well as the images upon that canvas. We are the paints as well as the brushes. In the divine matrix, we're the container within which all things exist. We're the bridge between our inner and our outer worlds and the mirror that shows us what we've created. This book is for those who long to awaken the power of their greatest passions and deepest aspirations. In the divine matrix, you are the seed of every miracle as well as the miracle itself. The existence of a primal web of energy that connects our bodies, the world, and everything in the universe opens the door to a powerful and mysterious possibility. That possibility suggests that we may be much more than simply observers, passing through a brief moment of time in this creation that already exists. When we look at life, our spiritual and material abundance, our relationships, our careers, our deepest loves and our greatest achievements, as well as our fears and the lack of all those things, we may also be looking squarely into the mirror of our truest and sometimes most unconscious beliefs. We see them in our surroundings because they're made manifest through the mysterious essence of the divine matrix. For this to be the case, consciousness itself must play a role in the existence of the universe, and this is what changes everything. We're the artists as well as the art. As far-fetched as this idea may sound to some people, it's precisely the crux of some of the greatest controversy among some of the greatest minds in recent history. In a quote from his autobiographical notes, for example, Albert Einstein shared his belief that we're essentially passive observers, living in a universe that's already in place and one in which we seem to have very little influence over our world. We live in a world, he said, which exists independently of us human beings, and which stands before us like a great, eternal riddle, at least partially accessible to our inspection and thinking. In contrast to Einstein's perspective, which is still widely held by many scientists today, Professor John Wheeler, a Princeton University physicist and a colleague of Einstein's, offers a radically different view of our role in creation. In terms that are bold, clear, and graphic, Wheeler says, quote, "We had this old idea that there's a universe out there, and here is man, the observer, safely protected from the universe by a 6-inch slab of plate glass," end of quote. Referring to late 20th century experiments that show us how simply looking at something changes that something. Wheeler continues, "Now we learn from the quantum world that to even observe so minuscule an object as an electron, we have to shatter the plate glass. We have to reach in there. So the old word observer simply has to be crossed off the books, and we must put in the new word participator." What a shift and a radically different interpretation of our relationship to the world around us. Wheeler is stating it's impossible for us to simply watch the world happen around us. Experiments in quantum physics do show, in fact, that the act of us simply looking at something as tiny as an electron, just focusing our awareness upon what that electron is doing for even an instant in time, changes the properties of that electron while we're looking. The experiments suggest that the very act of observation is an act of creation unto itself, and that consciousness is doing the creating. These findings seem to support Wheeler's proposition that we can no longer think of ourselves merely as onlookers who have no effect on the world that we're observing. Well, to think of us participating in creation, rather than simply passing through the universe during the brief period of a lifetime, requires a new view of what the universe is and how it works. Groundwork for precisely such a view was a basis of a series of books and papers by another Princeton physicist and a colleague of Einstein. His name was David Bohm. Before his death in 1992, Bohm left us two pioneering theories that offer a very different, and in some ways a nearly holistic view of our role in the universe. Though the words of the theories themselves may sound technical, when we really understand what the words are saying, the principles are actually very, very simple. The first of Bohm's theories was an interpretation of quantum physics that set the stage for his meeting and his subsequent friendship with Albert Einstein. It was the theory of Bohm's paper that opened the door to what he called the creative operation of underlying levels of reality. In other words, Bohm believed that there are deeper or maybe higher levels of creation that hold the blueprint for what happens here in our world. And it's in these subtle levels of reality that he believed our physical world actually begins. Well, the second theory was an explanation of the universe as a single, unified system of nature with everything connected in ways that maybe aren't always so obvious. In this paradigm-shifting work, Bohm believed that if we could see the universe in its entirety from a greater vantage point of somewhere other than this earth, that the things in our world, in fact, appear as what he called a projection of the things that are really happening in another realm, one that we simply can't see. He viewed both the seen as well as the unseen worlds as expressions of this greater, more universal order, and to distinguish between these two realms, he called them the implicate and the explicate order. The things that we can see and touch and that appear separate in our world, like rocks, oceans, forests, animals, and people, these are examples of his explicate order of creation. As separate as they may appear from one another, however, Bohm suggested that they're actually linked in the deeper reality in ways that we simply can't see from our place in creation. Bohm saw all of the things that look separate to us as part of a greater wholeness, and he called that wholeness the implicate order. So to describe the difference between Bohm's implicate and explicate order, he gave the analogy of a flowing stream of water. Using the different ways that we can see water flowing in the stream as a metaphor, he described the illusion of separateness. Quote, "On this stream, we may see an ever-changing pattern of vortices and ripples and waves and splashes, which evidently have no independent existence." End of quote. In other words, although the water's disturbances may look separate to us, Bohm viewed them as intimately linked and deeply, deeply connected to one another. They're all part of the same water. Well, Bohm used examples such as this to describe his sense that our universe and everything in it, including us, may in fact be part of a grand cosmic pattern where everything is evenly shared by all other portions. When he summarized this unified view of nature, he simply stated, quote, "We must learn to view everything as part of an undivided wholeness in flowing movement." Well, it was in the 1970s that Bohm offered an even clearer metaphor to describe how the universe may be thought of as a distributed yet undivided whole. Reflecting on the interrelated nature of creation, he became more convinced than ever that the universe works like a great cosmic hologram. And in the hologram, every fragment of a something contains the entire something, only on a smaller scale. It's a very, very simple idea. So from Bohm's perspective, what we see as our world in totality is actually the holographic projection of something even more real that's happening at a deeper level of creation. And it's this deeper level, this implicate level, is where all things begin. Well, the simplicity of the human body offers a beautiful example of just how a hologram works, and one that's already familiar to us, because the DNA from anywhere in our body will contain all of our genetic code, the entire pattern of our DNA for the rest of the body, no matter where that DNA comes from. So whether we sample our hair or finger or blood or the genetic pattern for the rest of our body, it's always in the same code. It's always the same. So just as the universe is constantly changing from the implicate to the explicate, the flow of the unseen to the seen is what makes this flow of creation work. It's this constantly changing nature that John Wheeler had in mind when he described the universe as a participatory universe, one that's unfinished, constantly is responding to changes in consciousness. Well, interestingly, this is precisely the way that the ancient traditions of the past suggest that our world works. From the Indian Vedas, believed by some scholars to date to 5,000 years BC, to the 2,000-year-old Dead Sea Scrolls, a general theme seems to suggest that the world is actually the mirror of things that are happening in a higher realm, in a deeper reality, a place that we simply cannot see from where we are in our world. Commenting on the new translations of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments, for example, known as the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, the translators summarize the content by saying precisely this. The scroll actually says, what happens on earth is but a pale reflection of that greater ultimate reality. So the implication of both the ancient texts and quantum theory, they're the same. It's that the unseen world is the place where we create the blueprint for our relationships, our careers, our success, the failures of the visible world. From this perspective, the divine matrix works like this great cosmic screen that allows us to see the energy of our emotions and our beliefs, all of our anger, hate, and rage, as well as our love, compassion, and understanding. All of that energy is projected in the physical medium that we call life. And just as a movie screen reflects the image of whatever or whoever has been filmed without judgment, the divine matrix appears to do precisely the same thing. It provides this neutral surface for our inner experiences and our beliefs to be seen in the outer world. Well, sometimes consciously, often not, we show our truest beliefs of everything from compassion to betrayal through the quality of the relationships that we find surrounding us. So the first key in our exploration of the divine matrix is to simply summarize what it does. The divine matrix is the container that holds the universe. The divine matrix is the bridge between our inner and our outer world, between all things. And the divine matrix is the mirror that shows us what we've created. The matrix does all of these things at the same time. In other words, we're like artists expressing our deepest passions, fears, dreams, and desires through the living essence of a mysterious quantum canvas. But unlike a conventional artist canvas, however, which exists in one place at a given time, our canvas is the same stuff that everything is made of. It exists everywhere, and it's always present. Well, if we carry this artist canvas analogy even one step further, we find that the divine matrix offers us a very unique canvas, because traditionally artists are separate from their work, and they use the tools of their craft to convey their inner creations through the outer expression. Well, within the divine matrix, the separation between the art and the artist disappears, because we are the canvas as well as the images upon that canvas. We are the tools as well as the artist using the tools. What a beautiful, beautiful way of seeing our world and our lives and the way things work. Because just as artists refine an image until it's just right in their minds, in many respects it appears that through the divine matrix we do precisely the same thing with our lives. through our artist palette of beliefs, judgments, emotions, and prayers. We find ourselves in relationships, in jobs and situations of support and betrayal that play out with different people in different places. And at the same time, these people and situations often feel hauntingly familiar. So as individuals, we come together and we share our inner life creations as a never-ending cycle of moment layered upon moment, day after day, and so on. Just the way an artist uses the same canvas again and again while searching for the perfect expression of an idea. We may think of ourselves as perpetual artists. We're building a creation that's ever-changing and never-ending. The implications of being surrounded by a malleable world of our own making are vast, they're powerful, to some people perhaps even a little frightening. Our ability to use the divine matrix intentionally and creatively suddenly empowers us to change everything about the way we see our role in the universe. At the very least, it suggests that there's much more to life than chance happenings and occasional synchronicities that we deal with the best we can. Ultimately, our relationship to the stuff that everything is made of, the divine matrix that connects us to our world, reminds us that we are creators ourselves. And as creators, we may express our deepest desires of healing, abundance, joy, and peace in everything from our bodies and our lives to our relationships and careers, and to do so consciously when and how we choose. But to experience such possibilities, however, requires a subtle yet very powerful shift in the way we think about our world and ourselves. It's in that shift that our secret desires, our highest goals, and our loftiest dreams suddenly appear within our grasp. As miraculous as such a reality may sound to you, all of these things and much, much more are possible within the realm of our divine matrix. The key is that we must not only recognize how it works, we also need a language to communicate our desires to this ancient web of energy, a language that it recognizes. To get an idea of our relationship to the divine matrix, it may be helpful to think of it as a really big cosmic blanket, one that begins and ends in the realms of the unknown and covers everything in between. The blanket is many layers deep, and it's everywhere all the time. It's already in place. Our bodies, our lives, and all that we know exist and take place within the fibers of this blanket. From our watery creation in our mother's womb to our marriages, divorces, friendships, and careers, all that we experience may be thought of as wrinkles in this cosmic blanket. From a quantum way of seeing the world, everything from the atoms of matter and a blade of grass to our bodies, the planet, and beyond may be thought of as a disturbance in the smooth fabric of our space-time blanket. Well, perhaps it's no coincidence, then, that ancient spiritual and poetic traditions have always described our existence in precisely the same way. The Vedic traditions, for example, describe a unified field of what they call pure consciousness that bathes and permeates all of creation. In these traditions, our experiences of thought, feeling, emotion, and belief, and all the judgment they create are viewed as the disturbances. They're interruptions in a field that would otherwise be smooth and motionless. In a similar fashion, the ancient 5th century text, the Sin Ming, describes the properties of an essence that is the blueprint for everything in creation. In this text, it's called the Tao. And just as we see in the Vedic scriptures, it's ultimately something that's beyond description. The Tao is everything. It's all that is. It's the container of all experience as well as the experience itself. The Tao is described as perfect, quote, like vast space, where nothing is lacking and nothing is in excess, end of quote. According to the Sin Ming, it's only when we disturb the tranquility of the Tao through our own judgments that its harmony eludes us. When the inevitable does happen and we find ourselves enmeshed in human feelings of anger and separation, the Sin Ming offers a guideline to remedy that condition as well. It simply says, quote, to come directly into harmony with this reality, just simply say when doubt arises, not to. In this not to, nothing is separate, nothing is excluded, end of quote. Well, I admit that while thinking of ourselves as a disturbance in a field of energy may take some of the romance out of life, it also gives us a powerful way to think of our world and ourselves. If we want to create new, healthy, and life-affirming relationships, bring healing and romance into our lives, or peaceful solution into the Middle East, for example, we must create a new disturbance in this field, one that mirrors our desire. We must create a new wrinkle in the stuff that everything is made of in our cosmic space-time blanket. Well, the key to tapping the awesome power of this divine matrix lies in our ability to embrace the 4 landmark discoveries that link it to our lives in what now is an unprecedented way. The first discovery is that there's a field of energy that connects all of creation. The second discovery is that this field plays the role of a container and a bridge and a mirror for the beliefs within us. The third discovery is that the field is said to be non-local and holographic. And as complicated as those sound, they're very simple terms. In other words, every part of this field is connected to every other part, and each piece individually mirrors the entire pattern, only on a smaller scale. And we'll talk about those more as we go through this book. The fourth discovery is that we communicate with this field, with this divine matrix, through a language that each of us already has. We're born with this language. We've had it since the moment we took our first breath in this world. It's the language of feeling and belief and emotion. Experiences that are thought to be unique only to us as humans. Well, we now recognize that it is our ability to embrace and apply these 4 discoveries that determine everything from our healing to our success. Ultimately, even our survival as a species may be directly linked to our ability and our willingness to share the life-affirming practices that come from a unified worldview and our understanding that begins with the blueprints in the divine matrix. Well, when we look at our lives from the viewpoint that everything is already everywhere all the time, the implications are so vast that for many they're hard to grasp. It's precisely because of our universal connection that we're empowered to support and share and participate in life's joys and tragedy anywhere, anytime. So how do we make use of such a power? Well, the answer to that question begins with our understanding that there really is no here and there, then and now. From the perspective of life as a universally connected field of energy, here is already there and then has always been now. Ancient spiritual traditions remind us that in each moment of the day, we make choices that either affirm or deny life in our bodies. And within each moment, we choose to nourish ourselves in a way that supports or depletes us. We choose to breathe deep, life-affirming breaths or shallow, life-denying breaths. We choose to think and speak about other people in a way that is either honoring or dishonoring. Well, through the power of what scientists now refer to as our non-local holographic consciousness, each of these seemingly insignificant choices that we all do every day, they have consequences that extend well beyond the place and the moment of our lives where we make them. Our individual choices combine to become our collective reality, and this is what makes these discoveries both exciting and for some people a little frightening. Through these understandings, we see why our good wishes, thoughts, and prayers are already at their destination. We see that we're not limited by our bodies or the laws of physics, at least the way we understand those laws today. We see how we can support our loved ones anywhere in the world, from the battlefields of Iraq to a boardroom halfway across the city without ever leaving our home. We see that it is possible to heal ourselves and others instantaneously, and it is possible to see across space and time without ever opening our eyes. This is our relationship to the divine matrix. We're given the power to imagine, to dream, to feel life's possibilities from within the matrix itself, so it can reflect back to us what we have created. Both ancient traditions and modern science now describe how this cosmic mirror works. Admittedly, while these studies may solve some mysteries of creation, they also open the door to even deeper questions of our existence. We clearly do not know all there is to know about the divine matrix. Science does not have all the answers. In all honesty, scientists don't even know for sure where this matrix comes from or how it originated. What we do know, however, is that we could study it for another 100 years and still not have all those answers. We know that the divine matrix is real. It exists. And because it's real, we may tap its creative power through the language of our emotions. And in that certainty, we can apply what we know in a way that's useful and meaningful in our lives. And when we do so, our connection to one another and all things can't be denied. And it's in light of this connection that we may realize just how powerful we really are in this world. From the place of strength that such a realization offers, we have the opportunity to become more peaceful and compassionate beings, to actively work and create a world that mirrors those qualities and more. Through the divine matrix, we have the opportunity to focus these attributes in our lives, applying them as our inner technology of feeling, imagination, and dreams. And when we do, we tap the true essence of the power to change our lives and change our world. This book is a result of over 20 years of research and my personal journey to make sense of the great secret held in our most ancient, mystical, and cherished traditions. So if you're one of those people who's always searched to answer the questions, are we really connected? And if so, how deep does that connection go? And how much power do we really have to change our world? Then I think you're going to like what you're about to explore. The reason is because this book is written precisely for you. It's you whose life bridges the reality of our past with the hope of our future. It's you who is being asked to forgive and find compassion in a world that's absolutely reeling from the scars of hurt and judgment and fear. The key to surviving our time in history is to create a new way of thinking about ourselves, and to do so while we're still living in the conditions that threaten our very existence. Ultimately, we may discover that our ability to understand and apply the rules of the divine matrix hold the key to everything from our deepest healing, our greatest joys, and even our survival as a species. Chapter 1. Question. What's in the space between? The answer? The divine matrix. Modern science is hot on the trail of solving one of the greatest mysteries of all time. You may not hear about it in the evening news. You probably won't see it on the front page of USA Today or the Wall Street Journal. Yet nearly 70 years of research in an area of science known as the new physics is pointing to a conclusion that we cannot escape. That powerful conclusion is the second key to unlocking the mystery of the divine matrix. It simply states that everything in our world is connected to everything else. Well, that's it, really. That's the news that changes everything, and which is absolutely shaking the foundations of science as we know it today. Okay, you're saying, we've heard this before. What makes this conclusion so different? What does it really mean to be so connected? Well, these are very good questions, and the answers may surprise you. Because the difference between the new discoveries and what we previously believed is that in the past we were simply told that the connection exists through technical phrases like sensitive dependence on initial conditions, also known as the butterfly effect, and theories that suggested what we do here has an effect there. We could vaguely observe that connection playing out in our lives. The new experiments, however, take us one step further. In addition to proving that we're connected to everything, the research now proves that the connection exists because of us. Our connectedness gives us the power to stack the deck in our favor when it comes to the way our lives play out. In everything from searching for romance and healing our loved ones to the fulfillment of our deepest aspirations, we are an integral part of all that we experience every day of our lives. That the discoveries show we can use our connection consciously opens the door to nothing less than our opportunity to tap the same power that drives the entire universe. Through the connection that lives inside of you and me and every human that walks this earth, we have a direct line to the same force that creates everything from atoms and stars to the DNA of life. But there's one small catch, however, and that is simply this: our power to do so is dormant until we awaken it. And the key to awakening such an awesome power is that we have to make a small shift in the way we see ourselves in the world. Well, as mind-boggling as it may sound, with a little shift, one little shift in our perceptions, we can tap the most powerful force in the universe to address even seemingly impossible situations, and it happens when we allow ourselves a new way of seeing our role in the universe. Well, for many people, because the universe seems like a really big place, almost too much for us to even think about, we can begin by seeing ourselves differently simply in our everyday lives. The small shift that we need is simply to see ourselves as part of the world rather than separate from the world. And the way to convince ourselves that we are truly part of everything that we see and experience is to understand precisely how that connection works. How are we connected? And what does that connection mean? And this leads us directly into the key number 3 of understanding the divine matrix. Key number 3 states that to tap the force of the universe itself, we must see ourselves as part of that universe rather than separate from the universe. Through the connection that joins all things, the stuff that the universe is made of appears to break the laws, at least the laws of time and space as we know them today. Though the details sound like science fiction, they're very real. Particles of light, the stuff everything is made of, that are called photons, for example, have been observed to actually bilocate. They can be in 2 different places separated by many miles at precisely the same instant in time. Well, from the DNA of our bodies to the atoms of everything else, things in nature appear to share information even faster than Albert Einstein predicted anything could ever travel. The information is shared faster than the speed of light. In some experiments, information has actually arrived at its destination before it ever left its place of origin. Well, historically, such phenomena were believed to be impossible. But apparently, they're not only possible, they may also be showing us something more than interesting anomalies of how these small particles work. The freedom of movement that the quantum particles demonstrate may in fact reveal how the rest of the universe works. We're made of those particles, and when we look beyond, they may be telling us how we work in the universe. While these results may sound more like the script of a futuristic Star Trek episode, they're being observed right now under the scrutiny of present-day scientists. Individually, the experiments that produce such effects are certainly interesting and deserve more investigation. When considered together, they also suggest that we may not be as limited by the laws of physics as we've believed in the past. Maybe things can travel faster than the speed of light, and maybe they can be in 2 places at once. And if things can, what about us? Well, these are precisely the possibilities that excite today's innovators and stir our own imaginations. It's the coupling of the imagination, the idea of something that could be possible, with an emotion that gives life to that possibility so it becomes a reality. Manifestation all begins with the willingness to make room in our beliefs for something that doesn't exist. And we create that something through the power of conscious awareness. The poet William Blake recognized the power of imagination as the essence of our existence rather than something that we simply experience occasionally in our spare time. Man is all imagination, he said. The eternal body of man is the imagination that is God himself. Well, philosopher and poet John Mackenzie further described our relationship with imagination, suggesting that the distinction between what is real and what is imaginary is not one that can be finally maintained. All things, he said, are imaginary. In both of these descriptions, the concrete events of life must first be envisioned as possibilities before they can ever become reality. For the imaginary ideas of one moment in time to become the reality of another, there must be something that links them together. Somehow, in the fabric of the universe, there must be a connection between past imaginings and the present and the future realities. Einstein firmly believed that the past and the future are somehow intimately entwined as the stuff of the 4th dimension, a reality that he called space-time. The distinction between past, present, and future, he said, is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. So in ways that we're only beginning to understand, we find that we are connected not only with everything that we see in our lives today, but also with everything that has ever been and with things that haven't even happened yet. And what we're experiencing now is the outcome of events that have occurred, at least in part, in a realm of the universe that we can't even see. Well, the implications of these relationships are huge. In a world where an intelligent field of energy connects everything from global peace to personal healing, what may have sounded like fantasy and miracles in the past suddenly becomes possible in our lives. With these connections in mind, we must begin to think of the way we relate to our life, our families, and even our casual acquaintances from a powerful new perspective. Good, bad, right or wrong, everything from the lightest of the light and the most beautiful life experiences to the most horrible occasions of human suffering can now no longer be written off as chance happenings. Clearly, the key to healing, peace, abundance, and creation of these experiences in our careers and our relationships and all the things that bring us joy is to understand just how deeply we are connected to everything in our reality. Searching for the matrix. If an intelligent field of energy really plays such a powerful role in how the universe works, why didn't we know about it until recently? We've just emerged from the 20th century, a time that historians may well come to regard as the most remarkable period in history. Within a single generation, we learned to unleash the power of the atom, to store a library the size of a city block on a computer chip, and how to read and engineer the DNA of life. So how could we have accomplished all of these scientific marvels yet missed the single most important discovery of all, the one understanding that gives us access to the power of creation itself? Well, the answer may surprise you. There was a time in our not-so-distant past that scientists did, in fact, attempt to solve the mystery of whether or not we're connected through an intelligent field of energy. And they did so by trying to prove or disprove once and for all as to whether or not the field even exists. While the idea of the experiment was good, over 100 years later, we're still recovering from the way that this famous experiment was interpreted. As a result, for most of the 20th century, if scientists dared to mention anything about a unifying field of energy that connects everything through what is otherwise empty space, they'd be laughed right out of the classroom or off of the university stage. With few exceptions, this idea was not one that was accepted or even allowed in serious scientific discussions. However, this has not always been the case. Since the time of the ancient Greeks, those who believed in a universal field of energy that connects everything referred to it simply as the ether. In Greek mythology, for example, ether was thought of as the presence of space itself and described as the air breathed by the gods. Both Pythagoras as well as Aristotle identified ether as the mysterious fifth element of creation, following the four familiar elements of fire, air, water, and earth. In later times, alchemists continued to use the word ether to describe the stuff that underlies everything in reality. With the birth of science, however, everything changed. The concept of the ether and even the word itself were tossed out of the literature, and they were replaced with what was believed to be a modern way of thinking of the world. The mere mention of the ether field today still ignites a 300-year-old controversy as to whether or not an invisible field of energy connects everything in the universe. Almost in the same breath, it resurrects the memory of the famous experiment that was designed to prove or disprove its existence once and for all. As is often the case with this kind of experiment, the outcome raised more questions and controversy than it resolved. History's greatest failed experiment. Performed over 100 years ago, the experiment is named after the two scientists that designed it, Albert Michelson and Edward Morley. The sole purpose of what is now called the Michelson-Morley experiment was to determine whether or not the mysterious ether of the universe does in fact exist. The long-anticipated experiment, designed to verify the results of a similar experiment performed in 1881, was the buzz of the scientific community that gathered in the laboratory of what is now Case Western Reserve University in 1887. Ultimately, it held consequences that even the best minds of the late 19th century could never have known. The thinking behind the experiment was innovative, to be sure. If ether really exists, Michelson and Morley reasoned, then the ether must be an energy that's everywhere, and it must be quiet and still. And if this is true, then the Earth passing through this field in space should create a movement, and that movement should be able to be measured. Well, just as we can detect a breeze of air as it ripples through the vast fields of wheat on the Kansas plains today, we should be able to detect the ether's breeze as well. Michelson and Morley named this hypothetical phenomenon the ether wind. The pilot of any airplane will agree that when an aircraft is flying with the currents of the atmosphere, the time to get from one place to another can be much shorter. When the plane is flying against the flow, however, it endures a rough ride, and wind resistance can add hours to the flight. Well, with these metaphors in mind, Michelson and Morley reasoned that if they could shoot a beam of light in two directions at the same time, the difference in the time it took the beams to reach their destination should allow them to detect the presence and the flow of the ether wind. It would be determined by whether or not the beam of light was moving against or with the flow of the ether. While the experiment was a good idea, the results surprised everyone. The bottom line was that Michelson and Morley's experiment detected no ether wind. In what looked like the absence of the wind, both the 1881 and the 1887 experiments seemed to lead to the same conclusion: no ether exists. Michelson interpreted the results of what has been called the most successful failed experiment in history, and he did so in the prestigious American Journal of Science. Quote, "The result of the hypothesis of a stationary ether field is thus shown to be incorrect, and the necessary conclusion follows that the hypothesis is erroneous." So while this sounds very complex, the bottom line to this experiment is that no ether field was detected. And while the experiment may have been described as a failure regarding proof of the ether, in fact, it simply proved that the ether field might not behave quite the way scientists originally expected. Just because no movement was detected does not mean that the ether isn't there. An analogy for this experiment would be to hold your finger above your head to test for the wind. If you concluded that no air exists because you felt no wind in the moment of the test, that would be a rough equivalent of the thinking behind the conclusions of the 1887 experiment. And of course, we know that that's simply false. Accepting this experiment as proof that ether does not exist, modern scientists now operate upon the assumption that things in our world happen independently of each other. They accept that what someone does in one part of the world is completely unrelated to the rest of the world and has no effect upon someone else half a planet away. Arguably, this experiment has become the basis for a worldview that has had a profound impact on our lives and even our planet. As a consequence of this kind of thinking, we govern our nations, we power our cities, we test atomic bombs and exhaust our resources, believing that what we're doing in one place has absolutely no effect anywhere else. Since 1887, we've based the development of an entire civilization on the belief that everything is separate from everything else, a premise that more recent experiments show today is simply not true. Over 100 years after the original experiment, new studies suggest that the ether, or at least something like it, does in fact exist. It does not appear to be in the form that Michelson and Morley had expected, however. Believing that the field must be motionless and made of electricity and magnetism, just as other forms of energy that were being discovered in the mid-1800s were, Michelson and Morley searched for the ether just as they would a conventional form of energy. But ether is far from being conventional. In 1987, the very prestigious journal Nature published an unassuming report simply titled Special Relativity, with implications that absolutely shake the foundation of the Michelson-Morley experiment, as well as everything we believe about our connection to the world. Described another experiment that was conducted by scientist E.W. Silvertooth, and it was sponsored by the United States Air Force, duplicating the 1887 experiment, but with equipment that was much more sensitive. Silvertooth reported that he did detect a movement in the ether field, and furthermore, it was precisely linked to the motion of the Earth through space, just as Michelson and Morley had predicted nearly 100 years earlier. This experiment and others suggest that the ether does, in fact, exist, just as Max Planck suggested in 1944. Although modern experiments continue to indicate that the field is there, we can be sure it will never be called the ether again. In scientific circles, the mere mention of the word conjures up adjectives ranging from pseudoscience to hogwash. As we'll see in the next chapter, the existence of a universal field of energy that permeates our world is being thought of in very different terms. The experiments that prove its existence are so new, in fact, that a single name is yet to be chosen. So regardless of what we call it, something is definitely there. It connects everything in our world and beyond, and it affects us in ways we're only beginning to understand. So the question is, how could this have happened? How could we have missed such a powerful key to understanding how the universe works? Well, the answer to this question cuts to the very core of the quest that's created the greatest controversy and the most heated debates among the greatest minds of the last 2 centuries. It's a controversy that continues to this day, and it's all about the way we see ourselves in the world and our interpretation of what we see. The key here is that the energy that connects everything in the universe is also part of what it connects. So rather than thinking of the field as separate from everyday reality, the experiments now tell us that the mundane, visible world actually originates as this field. It's as if the blanket of the divine matrix is spread smoothly throughout the universe, and every once in a while it wrinkles here and there into a rock or a tree or a planet or a person that we recognize. Well, ultimately, all of these things are just ripples in the field. This subtle yet powerful shift in thinking about the field is the key to tapping the power of this divine matrix in our lives. If we're going to do so, however, we must understand why scientists view the world as they do today. Different rules for different worlds. Science is simply a language to describe the natural world and our relationship to that world and the universe beyond. And it's only one language. There have been other languages such as alchemy and spirituality, for example, that were used long before modern science ever came along. While they might not have been sophisticated, they certainly worked. And I'm always amazed when people ask me the question, what did we do before science? Did we know anything about our world? Well, the answer is certainly yes, a resounding yes. We knew a lot about the world, and we knew what we knew in a way that worked so well that it provided an entire framework for understanding everything from the origin of life to why we become sick to what we do when we get sick, and how to calculate the cycles of the sun, the moon, and the stars. While this kind of knowing was obviously not described in technical language like we use today, it did a pretty good job of providing a useful story of how things work and why things are as they are. So good, in fact, that civilization existed for over 5,000 years without ever relying upon science, at least science as we know it today. Science and the scientific era are typically acknowledged as beginning in the 1600s. It was in July of 1687 that Isaac Newton formalized the mathematics that seemed to describe our everyday world, and he published his classic work entitled Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, which loosely translates to Mathematic Principles of Natural Philosophy. Well, for over 200 years, Newton's observations of nature were the foundation of the scientific field that we now call physics. And along with Maxwell's theories of electricity and magnetism in the late 1800s, Einstein's theories of relativity from the early 1900s, this classical physics has been tremendously successful in explaining the large-scale things that we see in our world, things like the movement of planets and galaxies and apples falling from trees. It's actually served us so well that we were able to calculate the orbits for our satellites. We even put a man on the moon based on this kind of thinking. During the 1900s, however, something changed. Advances in science revealed a place in nature where Newton's laws just don't seem to work. The very small world of the atom. Before then, we simply didn't have the technology to peer into this subatomic world or to watch the way atoms behave during the birth of a star in a distant galaxy, for example. In both realms, the largest and the smallest, scientists began to see things that could not be explained by the traditional physics, by Newton's physics. A new kind of physics had to be developed with rules that would explain the exceptions in these extremes, hence the birth of quantum physics. The definition of quantum physics is found in the name itself. The word quantum is defined as a discrete quantity of electromagnetic energy. It's the very stuff our world is made of. So quantum physics is really about the study of everything in our world, what it's made of. We reduce it to its most elementary essence. Quantum physicists soon found that what looks to us like the solid world really isn't so solid at all. Maybe the following analogy will help us to understand why. When the local movie theater projects a moving image on the screen in front of us, we know that the story we're seeing is an illusion. The romance, the tragedy that tug at our heartstrings are actually the result of many still individual pictures being flashed very quickly, one after another, to create the sense or the illusion of a continuous story. So while our eyes do see single pictures frame by frame, our brain merges those single pictures into what we perceive as this nonstop movement. Well, quantum physicists believe that our world works much in the same way. For instance, what we see is the football touchdown or the triple axel of a figure skater on a Sunday afternoon sports program. In quantum terms, is actually a series of individual events that happen very quickly and very closely together. Similarly to the way that many images strung together make a movie look so real, life actually occurs as brief, tiny bursts of light, and these bursts are called quanta. The quanta of life happen so quickly That unless our brain is trained to operate differently, like in some forms of meditation, it simply averages all of the pulses together to create the continuous action that we see as the Sunday sports. So quantum physics, then, is the study of things that happen on the very small scale of the forces that underlie our physical world. The difference in the way that the quantum world and the everyday world seem to work has created two schools of thought among scientists in contemporary physics, the classical and the quantum. And each school has its own theories to support it. So the great challenge of our time has been to marry these two very different ways of thinking into a single view of the universe, a view that we call the unified field theory. To do so requires the existence of something that fills what we think of as empty space. But what could that be? What's in the space between? The science fiction classic Contact is one of my all-time favorite movies. Early in the plot, the main character, Dr. Arroway, played by Jodie Foster, asked her father the question that becomes the tagline for the rest of the movie. The question is simply this: are we alone in the universe? Her father's answer becomes her touchstone for things that are true for her for the rest of her life. When she finds herself in a particularly vulnerable situation, such as opening herself to romance or trusting her experience in a distant universe where she's been transported, her father's words become the guiding principle of her beliefs. His answer is simply that if we are alone in the universe, it seems like an awful waste of space. Well, in much the same way, if we truly believe that the space between any two things is empty, then it seems like a tremendous waste of space as well. Scientists believe that over 90% of the universe is what they call missing and appears to us as empty space. Well, that means that of the entire universe as we know it, only 10% has anything in it. Do you really believe that the 10% of creation we occupy is all there is? What's in the empty space that we think of as empty? If it is really empty, then there's a big question that must be answered. How can the waves of energy that carry everything from our cell phone calls to the reflected light that carries the words from the pages of a book to your eyes travel from one place to another? Just as the water in a pond carries ripples away from the place where a stone is tossed into it, something must exist that carries the vibrations of life from one point to another. And for this to be true, however, we must upset one of the key tenets of modern science, the belief that space is empty. When at last we can answer the question of what the space is made of, we will have taken a great step toward understanding ourselves and our relation to the world around us. The question, as we shall see, is as old as we are. The answer, as we'll see as well, has probably been with us all along. From the Aboriginal history etched into the cliff walls of Australia, now believed to be over 20,000 years old, to the temples of ancient Egypt and the rock art of the American desert Southwest, our sense that we are somehow connected to the universe, our world, and one another is a constant that's always been with us. And while that belief appears to be stronger than ever today, precisely what it is that does the connecting continues to be the subject of controversy and debate. For us to be connected, there must be something that connects us, from poets and philosophers to scientists and those who seek their answers beyond the accepted ideas of their day. Our sense has been that within the emptiness of what we call space, something is actually there. 19th century physicist Conrad Finagle posed the obvious question regarding the significance of space itself. He asked us to consider what would happen if you took away the space from between matter. Everything in the universe would scrunch together, he said, into a volume no longer than a dust speck. Space is what keeps everything from happening in the same place, he said. Well, in the simplicity of just a few words, Finagle describes the obvious. There must be something, some stuff that lives between all of the other stuff, something that connects everything on the one hand while keeping it all from happening at the same time on the other hand. The pioneering anthropologist Louis Leakey once said, "Without an understanding of who we are, we cannot truly advance." Now, I believe there's a lot of truth in this statement. The way we have seen ourselves in the past worked well enough to get us where we are today. Now it's time to open the door for a new view of ourselves, one that allows for an even greater possibility. It may be that our reluctance to accept just what it means to have space occupied by an intelligent force, and for us to be part of that space, has been the greatest stumbling block in our understanding of who we are and how the universe really works. In the 20th century, modern science may have discovered what's inside of empty space, a field of energy. It's different from any other form of energy we've ever known. Just as Newton's ether suggested, this energy appears to be everywhere always and to have existed since the very beginning of time. In the 1928 lecture, Albert Einstein said, "According to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space." End of quote. As we mentioned earlier, Max Planck stated that because the field exists, it suggests that intelligence is responsible for our physical world. Planck said that we must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. He concluded that this mind is the matrix of all matter. The tale of Einstein's lion. Whether we talk about the cosmic space between distant stars and galaxies or the microspace between the bands of energy that form the atom, from textbooks to telescopes, we typically think of space between things as being empty. And when we say that something is empty, we typically mean that nothing, absolutely nothing at all, exists in that space. Well, without doubt, to the untrained eye, what we call space certainly looks empty to us. But how empty can it really be? When we really think about it, what would it mean to live in a world where the space between things was truly void of anything? First, we know that to find such a place in nature is probably impossible for one reason. As the saying goes, nature abhors the emptiness of a vacuum. If we could somehow magically transport ourselves to such a place, however, what would it look like? Well, to begin with, it would be a very dark place. While we could turn on a flashlight, for example, the light from that flashlight could not travel anywhere because there would be nothing for the light waves to travel through. It would be as if we'd thrown a stone into the pond with no water and we're looking for ripples on the surface from the impact. The stone would hit the bottom, whether or not the water was there. But there would be no waves, as the waves that would normally radiate from the impact would have no medium to travel through. Well, it's for precisely the same reason our hypothetical world would also be very quiet. Sound must travel through some kind of medium to perpetuate itself. In fact, almost any kind of energy as we know it today, from the motion of wind to the heat of the sun, could not exist because the electrical fields and the magnetic fields and the radiant fields and even the fields of gravity would not have the same meaning in a world where the space was truly empty. Fortunately, we don't have to speculate about what such a world would be like because the space that surrounds us is anything but empty. Regardless of what we call it or how science and religion define it, it's clear that there is a force. It's a field, it's a presence that is what's called the great net that connects everything in creation and links us to a higher power of a greater world. Early in the 20th century, Albert Einstein made reference to the mysterious force that he was certain exists in what we see as the universe around us. Nature shows us only the tail of the lion, he said, suggesting that there's something more to what we see as reality, even if we can't see it from our cosmic vantage point. Through a beauty and eloquence that's typical of Einstein's view of the universe, he elaborated on this analogy of the cosmos. He said, "I don't doubt that the lion belongs to that tail, even though he cannot at once reveal himself because of his enormous size." In later writings, Einstein went on to say that regardless of who we are or what our role in the universe might be, we're all subject to a greater power. Human beings, he said, vegetables or cosmic dust, we all dance to what he called a mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. It's with this declaration of an intelligence underlying creation, Planck earlier described the energy of Einstein's lion and shook the traditional foundation of the entire discipline of physics. In doing so, he ignited a flame of controversy that continues to burn hotter than ever today. In the fire of that flame, the old ideas of what our world is made of and the reality of the universe, for that matter, have flown right out the door. Over 90 years ago, the father of quantum theory told us that everything is connected through this very real, very unconventional form of energy. Connected at the source, quantum entanglement. Actually, the idea that particles are connected on the micro scale of our world is not so new. Since Max Planck offered his equations of quantum physics early in the 20th century, many theories have developed and many experiments have been performed that seem to prove precisely that. On the smallest levels of the universe, atoms and subatomic particles do, in fact, act as if they're connected. The problem is that scientists don't know how, or even if the behavior that's observed on such small levels has any meaning for the larger realities of our daily lives. And if it does, then the findings suggest that the amazing technologies of science fiction that we've seen in the past may soon be the reality of our world today. As recently as 2004, physicists from Germany, China, and Austria published reports that sounded more like fantasy than a scientific experiment. In the journal Nature, the scientists announced the first documented experiments of what they called open-ended teleportation, for example, sending quantum information about a particle to different locations at the same time. Other experiments have demonstrated equally impossible sounding feats, such as beaming particles from one point to another and bilocating. Well, as different as each experiment sounds from the others, they share a common denominator, and that denominator implies an even greater story. Because for these experiments to work the way they do, there must exist a medium, something for the particles to move through, and herein lies what may be the greatest mystery of modern times, because conventional physics states that this medium does not exist. On July 25th, 1997, scientific journals throughout the world published the results of something that traditional physicists say should not have even happened. Reported to over 3,400 journalists, educators, scientists, and engineers in more than 40 countries, the University of Geneva in Switzerland had performed an experiment, and it was done on the stuff that our world is made of, particles of light called photons. The results continue to shake the foundation of conventional wisdom today. Specifically, for their experiment, the scientists had split a single particle of light, a single photon, into two separate particles. And when they did so, they created twin particles with identical properties. Then, using equipment developed precisely for this experiment, they fired both of the particles away from one another in opposite directions. The twins were placed in a specially designed chamber with two fiber optic pathways, just like the ones that transmit phone calls today. Each path extended away from the chamber in opposite directions for a distance of 7 miles. So by the time each twin reached its target, 14 miles separated it from the other. At the end of the pathway, the twins were forced to choose between two random routes that were identical in every respect. What makes this experiment so interesting is that when the twin particles reached the place where they had to follow one route or another, they both made precisely the same choices every single time. They followed precisely the same path every single time without fail. The results were identical every time the experiment was conducted, even though they were separated by these 14 miles. Though conventional wisdom states that the twins are separate, in fact, and have no communication with one another, they act as if they're still connected. Physicists call this mysterious connection quantum entanglement. In Professor Gissen's words, the man who conducted the experiments, what is fascinating is that entangled photons form one and the same object even when the twins are separated geographically. If one of them is modified, the other photon automatically undergoes the same change. End of quote. Historically, there's been absolutely nothing in traditional physics that would account for what Gissen's experiments showed. Yet we see it time and time again. Dr. Raymond Chow of the University of California at Berkeley further describes the results of the Geneva experiments as what he called one of the deep mysteries of quantum mechanics. He said these connections are a fact of nature proven by experiments, but to try to explain them philosophically is what he calls very difficult. Well, the reason these experiments are important to us, the reason I'm sharing them with you here today, is because conventional wisdom would have us believe that there is no way for these particles to communicate with one another, that their choices are independent of one another, not related. Our belief has been that when physical objects in this world are separate, that they really are separate in every sense of the word. But the particles, these photons, they're showing us something very different. Commenting on the possibility of this kind of phenomenon long before the 1997 experiment actually occurred, Einstein called the possibility of such results spooky action at a distance. Well, today, scientists believe these unconventional results are properties that occur only in the quantum realm, and they acknowledge them as what they call today quantum weirdness. Well, the connection between these particles, between the photons, was so complete that it even appeared to be instantaneous. Once it was recognized on the very small scale of the photons, precisely the same phenomenon was found to exist in other places in nature, even in galaxies that are separated by light years. So, in other words, when a change would happen in one galaxy, we would see the same change in another galaxy light years away at precisely the same moment in time. Gison says that in principle, it should make no difference whether the correlation between the particles occurs when they're separated by a few meters or by an entire universe. Why? What connects two particles of light, or two galaxies, to such a degree that a change in one happens simultaneously in the second? What are we being shown about the way the world works that we may have missed in early experiments from the past? To answer this kind of question, we first have to understand where the divine matrix comes from. And to do that, we have to take a step back, way back, all the way to the time that Western scientists believe is the beginning of everything, or at least the beginning of the universe as we know it, time called the Big Bang. The origin of the matrix. Mainstream scientists believe that our universe began between 15 and 20 billion years ago, with a massive explosion unlike anything that had ever existed before or has since. Although there are conflicting theories about the precise timing and whether there was a single explosion or multiple explosions, there appears to be a general agreement that our universe began with a massive release of energy a long time ago. In 1951, astronomer Fred Hoyle coined a term for that unfathomable explosion that's still used today. He named it the Big Bang. Researchers have calculated that just fractions of a second before the Big Bang occurred, our entire universe was much, much smaller than it is today. Computer models suggest that it was so small, in fact, that it was tightly compressed into a single tiny ball of energy. And with all of the empty space removed from what we see as the universe today, that ball is believed to have been about the size of a single green pea. While it may have been very tiny, however, it certainly wasn't cool. The model suggests that the temperature within that tightly compressed space was an unimaginable 18 billion million degrees Fahrenheit, many times hotter than the present temperature of the sun today. I've asked the researchers how they know this, and they reply by saying, okay, we don't know for sure. It was 18 billion million degrees, but we know it was hot. It was really hot. So we have hot temperatures within a fraction of a second following the Big Bang. The simulations showed the temperatures may have cooled shortly thereafter to only a balmy 18 billion degrees or so, and that the birth of our new universe by that time was well underway. The key here is this. Is the Big Bang's explosive force ripped into the emptiness of what was believed to be the void. It carried more than just the heat and the light that we would expect, because it also carried energy. It carried a pattern of energy that became the blueprint for all that is now and all that can ever be. And it's this pattern that's the subject of the ancient myth, the timeless lore, and the mystical wisdom, with names that range from the Buddhist sutra's net of Indra to the Hopi tradition's web of Spider Grandmother. The echo of that pattern remains with us today, and it's this net or web of energy that continues to expand throughout the cosmos as the quantum essence of all things, including us and our world. This is the energy that connects our lives as the divine matrix. It's this essence as well that acts as a many-dimensional mirror, reflecting back to us as our world what we create in our emotions and our beliefs. Well, what are the first questions that comes to mind when we think about the universe beginning as an explosion? is how can we be so sure that everything in the universe is really connected? Wouldn't the destructive power of the blast destroy everything in its wake? Well, to answer this question, let's go back to the Big Bang and the University of Geneva experiment in the previous section. As different as they appear from one another, there's a subtle similarity. In each case, the connection that's being explored exists between two things that were once physically joined. In the case of the photons, splitting a single particle into two identical particles created the twins. In the case of the universe, the tiny ball of energy that expanded into the many particles of today is the analogy of that experiment. Well, this was done to assure that each one was alike in every way in the case of the experiment. The fact that the photons and the particles from the Big Bang were once physically part of one another is the key to everything. It's the key to their connectivity. Because it appears that once something is joined, it's always connected, whether it remains physically linked or not. And it's this pivotal discovery that becomes our fourth key to understanding the divine matrix. That key is simply this: once something is joined, it's always connected, whether or not it remains physically linked. This is key in our discussion for one really important and often overlooked reason. As huge as our universe looks to us today, at one time all the matter in the universe was compressed into a very small space. In that unimaginable state of compression, everything was physically joined. And as the energy of the Big Bang caused our universe to expand, the particles became separated by greater and greater amounts of space. Regardless of how much space separates two things once joined, however, the experiments suggest that they are always connected. There's every reason to believe that the entangled state that connects particles separated today also connects the stuff of our universe that was connected before the Big Bang. Technically, everything that was joined as our pea-sized universe 15 to 20 billion years ago is still connected. And the energy that does the connecting is what Max Planck described as the matrix of everything. Today, modern science has refined our understanding of Planck's matrix, describing it as a form of energy that is everywhere, always present, and one that has existed since the time of the Big Bang. The existence of this field implies three principles that have a direct effect upon the way we live, all that we do, what we believe, and even how we feel about each day of our lives. Admittedly, these principles directly contradict many of the well-established beliefs of both science and spirituality on the one hand. At the same time, however, it is precisely these principles that open the door to an empowering and life-affirming way of seeing our world and our lives. The first principle suggests that because everything exists within the divine matrix, everything is connected. And if things are connected, then what we do in one part of our lives must have an effect and influence other parts of our lives. The second principle suggests the divine matrix is holographic, meaning that any portion of the field contains everything else in the field. As consciousness itself is believed to be holographic, this means that the prayer we create in our living room, for example, for our loved ones halfway around the world already exists with our loved ones or where it was intended. There's no need to send our prayers anywhere because they already exist everywhere. That is the holographic principle. The third principle suggests that the past, present, and future are intimately joined. The matrix appears to be the container that holds time, providing for a continuity between the choices of our present and the experiences of our future. So regardless of what we call it or how science and religion define it, it's clear there's something out there. There's a force, it's a field, it's a presence that is the great net that links us with one another, our world, and very probably a greater presence. If we can truly grasp what these three principles tell us about our relationship to one another, then the events of our lives take on an entirely new meaning. We become participants rather than victims of forces that we can't see and don't understand. To be in such a place is where our empowerment really begins. Chapter 2, Shattering the Paradigm, the experiments that change everything. The first rays of the morning sun cast their long shadows from behind the Sangre de Cristo mountains towering behind us to the east. I'd agreed to meet my friend Joseph there in the valley to simply walk, talk, and enjoy the morning. As we stood in the rim of the vast expanse of land that connects northern New Mexico with southern Colorado, we could see for miles across the fields that separate us from the great gash in the earth, the Rio Grande Gorge, forming the banks of the Rio Grande River. The high desert sage was especially fragrant that morning. As we began our walk, Joseph commented on the family of plants, the sage that covers the land. This entire field, he began, as far as our eyes can see, works together as a single plant. The heat from his breath mixed with the icy morning air and formed brief clouds of steam that lingered in the air for a few seconds as he formed each word. There are many bushes in this valley, he continued, and every plant is joined to the others through a root system that's beyond our view. Though they're hidden from our eyes beneath the ground, however, the roots still exist. The entire field is one big family of sage. And as with any family, he explained, the experience of one member is shared to some degree by all others. I listened to what Joseph was saying. What a beautiful metaphor for the way people are connected to one another in the world around us. We've been led to believe that we're separate from one another, separate from our world, and separate from everything that happens in the world. And in that belief, we often feel isolated. We feel alone, sometimes powerless to change the things that cause our own pain and suffering. The irony is that we also find ourselves inundated with self-help books and workshops that tell us how connected we are, how powerful our consciousness is, and how humankind is really a single precious family. So as I listened to Joseph, I couldn't help but think of the way the great poet Rumi described our condition in this world. Rumi said, "What strange beings we are, that sitting in what he calls hell, at the bottom of the dark, we're afraid of our own immortality." Precisely, I thought to myself, not only are the plants in this field connected, but they have a power together that's greater than any of them has alone. Any single plant in this valley, for example, influences the small area of earth that surrounds it. Put hundreds of thousands of those plants together, though, now you have a power to reckon with. Together, those plants can change the pH of the soil, for example, in a way that assures their survival. And by doing so, the very byproduct of their existence, their oxygen, becomes the essence of ours. As a unified family, these plants can change their world. Well, we may actually have more in common with the sage plants in that New Mexico valley than you'd think. And just as they have power individually and collectively to change their world, so do we. A growing body of research suggests that we're much more than cosmic latecomers simply passing through this universe that was completed long ago. The experiments lead to conclusions that we're actually creating the universe as we go. We're adding to what already exists. In other words, we appear to be the very energy that is making the universe as it is today, as well as the beings that experience what we're creating. And that's because we are consciousness, and consciousness appears to be the same stuff that the universe is made from. Well, this is the very essence of quantum theory that troubled Einstein so much. Till the end of his life, he held fast to his belief that the universe exists independently of us. He responded to analogies of our ability to affect the world in the experiments that show that matter changes when we observe it. He called them spooky action at a distance. He said, "I like to think that the moon is there even if I'm not looking at it," using an example of how he wanted to believe that we are independent of the world around us. As mentioned before, while our precise role in creation is still not fully understood, experiments in the quantum realm clearly show that consciousness has a direct effect upon the most elementary particles of creation. It's the stuff we're made of, and we are the source of that consciousness. Perhaps Princeton University's John Wheeler, who was a colleague of Einstein, may have best summarized our newly understood role. Wheeler's studies led him to believe that we may live in a universe that actually is created by consciousness itself, a process that he calls a participatory universe. According to the participatory principle, Wheeler says, we could not even imagine a universe that did not somewhere and for some stretch of time contain observers. That's us. Because he says the very building blocks of the universe are the acts of consciousness interacting with the universe. Wheeler offers the central point of quantum theory as the foundation for his statement, And that point is this, is that no phenomenon is really a phenomenon until it's observed. If the building materials of the universe are made from observation and participation, our observation, our participation, then what is the stuff that we're creating? To create anything, there must first be something there for us to create with, some malleable essence. That's the equivalent of Play-Doh for the universe. So what are the universe, the world, and our bodies made of? How does it all fit together? And do we really have control of anything? Well, to answer this kind of question, we must move beyond the boundaries of our traditional sources of knowledge. We've got to move beyond science and religion and spirituality and marry all of them into a greater wisdom. This is where the divine matrix comes in. It's not that the matrix plays the role of a byproduct in the universe or is simply part of creation. The matrix is creation. It's both the material that composes everything as well as the container for everything it's created. So when I think of the matrix this way, I'm reminded of how University of California cosmologist Joel Primack described the instant that creation began. Rather than the Big Bang being an explosion that happened in one place in the way we typically expect explosions to happen, he suggests that the Big Bang did not occur somewhere in space, rather that it occupied all of space. The Big Bang was space, he says, bursting itself into a new kind of energy as that energy. So just the way the origin of the universe was space itself manifesting as energy, the matrix is reality itself, all possibilities, ever moving as the enduring essence that connects all things. The force before the beginning. The ancient collection of texts from India known as the Vedas are among the world's oldest scriptures and believed by some scholars to date back as far as 7,000 years. In what is perhaps the best-known scripture, the Rig Veda, there's a description of a force that underlies all of creation and from which all things are formed, the force that existed before the beginning. This force, named Brahman, is described as the unborn in whom all existing things abide. Further in the text, it becomes clear that all things exist because the one manifest as the many, according to the text, the formless, putting on forms. Well, in a very different language, we could think of the divine matrix in precisely the same way, as the force that happens before the other forces. It's the container that holds the universe, as we mentioned earlier, as well as the blueprint for everything that can happen in our physical world. Because it's the stuff the universe is made of, it stands to reason that it's existed since the beginning of creation. And if this is the case, then the logical question is, why haven't scientists found evidence of that matrix before now? This very good question is one that I've asked scientists and researchers investigating this field every opportunity that I get. And each time I ask, the response is so similar, I can almost predict what's about to happen. First, there's a look of disbelief that I could in any way imply that science somehow missed something as important as a field of energy that connects everything in creation. Next, the discussion turns to equipment and technology. We simply have not had the technology to detect such a field, is what they say. It's the way the answer usually goes. While this may be true at some point, for at least the last 100 years, we have had the equipment and we have had the ability to build detectors that would tell us the divine matrix or the ether or the web of creation, or whatever we choose to call it, exists. So it may be more accurate to say that the greatest stumbling block to our discovery of the divine matrix has been less about the equipment and more about the reluctance of mainstream science to acknowledge that it's there. This primal force of energy, the divine matrix, provides the essence for all that we experience and create. It holds the key to unraveling the deepest mysteries of who we are, as well as answering the oldest question about how things work in our world. The divine matrix. The experiments show that the matrix is made of an energy form that's unlike any kind of energy that we've ever known in the past. Maybe that's why it took so long for scientists to find it. It's called subtle energy, and it simply does not work the way that typical fields of electricity or magnetism work. The field that connects everything appears to be a tightly woven web. It makes up what we now call the fabric of creation, the divine matrix. There are three attributes that set the divine matrix apart from any other energy of its kind. First, it can be described as being everywhere all the time. It already exists. Unlike a broadcast from a television or a radio station that has to be created in one place before being sent somewhere else to be received, this field already exists everywhere. Secondly, it appears that this field began when creation began, with the Big Bang, or whatever we choose to call the beginning. Obviously, no one was here to tell us what existed before the beginning, but scientists believe that the massive release of energy that jolted our universe into existence was the very act of creating space itself. As the hymn of creation from the ancient Rig Veda suggests, before the beginning, not even nothing existed then, no air yet and no heaven. So as the existence of nothing exploded into the something of space, the stuff between the nothing was born. So we can think of this divine matrix as the echo of that moment in time, and a link made of space and time that does connect us with the beginning of everything. The third characteristic of this field, and perhaps the one that makes it so meaningful in our lives, is that it appears to have intelligence. In other words, the field responds to us. It responds to thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, the power of human emotion. In the language of another time, ancient traditions did their very best to share this great secret with us. Inscribed in the temple walls, pinned upon time-worn parchments, and engineered into the lives of the people themselves, for centuries, those who came before us left the instructions that tell us how to communicate with the energy that connects everything. In a non-verbal language, our ancestors tried to show us how to heal our bodies and how to breathe life into our deepest desires and greatest dreams. And it's only now, nearly 5,000 years after the first of those instructions was recorded, that the ancient language is now recognized by science. Science is rediscovering the very same relationships between us and our world. The energy found in the new experiments is so new that scientists have yet to agree on a single term to describe it. So there are many different names that are being used to identify this field that connects everything. Edgar Mitchell, for example, the former Apollo astronaut, calls it nature's mind. A physicist and co-author of the superstring theory, Dr. Michio Kaku, calls it the quantum hologram. And while these are modern names for the cosmic force that's believed to be responsible for the universe, we find similar themes and even similar words in texts created thousands of years before quantum physics. Dating to the 4th century AD, for example, the Gnostic Gospels also use the word mind to describe this great force, and how, from what they called the power of the silence, appeared a greater power, the mind of the universe, which manages all things. Well, as different as the names sound from one another, all of them appear to be describing the same thing: the living essence. It's the fabric of our reality. It's this mind as well that Max Planck made reference to in his famous speech in the mid-20th century. Beyond any reasonable doubt, the experiments in the previous discussion show us that this matrix exists, regardless of what we choose to call it, or which laws of physics it may or may not conform to. The field that connects everything in creation is real. It's here in this very instant. It exists as you and me. It is the universe within us as well as the universe around us. It's a quantum bridge between all that is possible in our minds and what becomes real in our world. The matrix of energy that explains why the three experiments work as they do also explains why the positive feelings and prayers within us can be so powerful in the world around us. But our connection to the matrix of all matter doesn't stop there. It continues into the things that you can't see. The divine matrix is everywhere. It's everything, from the bird that's flying through the space high above you in this very moment to the cosmic particles that pass through our bodies and homes as if we were empty space. All exist within the same container of reality. It is what space itself is made of. When you think about the matrix and wonder where it may be, you can rest assured that wherever space exists, the matrix is there. Through the divine matrix,